Key amongst the highlights of what I'm going to share with you in this session is some pretty compelling research that actually came out of MIT. That adaptability isn't just essential to our survival and growth, although we know that's definitely true because Darwin said so about 150 years ago. It is actually the most valuable skill set that we can develop in growing our organization's revenue and return on investment. Now, hopefully that's got your attention, but maybe you're thinking, well, that's all very well for the organization, but what's in it for me? Well, if you think that adaptability is all about overcoming resistance to change, then you're actually only getting about half of the picture. And the other half that we'll talk about, the punchline of which is that change is actually the best opportunity that any of us is ever going to get to find out who we are, and more importantly, find out who we could be, because change gives us the opportunity to explore the very limits of our capabilities. So there's a huge amount in this for us personally. In the session also, I'm going to be putting it to you, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, that we are approaching change the wrong way. The way that most organizations are trying to make people more adaptable is actually broken. And if I'm telling you that, then I kind of have a responsibility to offer a solution as to what is the right way. And I'll share with you the high performance change adaptability intelligence model that we've developed that provides a roadmap towards mastering adaptability. And then finally, I'll give you a couple of practical antidotes that you can take away with you today, that you can start using and practicing as soon as this session ends, because what I'm going to give you is absolutely as far from rocket science as you can imagine. But things that are easy to understand aren't always easy to implement and do. That's why most of you have a delta between how adaptable you are and want to be. So let's get into it. On the one hand, COVID-19 has reminded us all, as if we needed it, that the world is becoming increasingly unpredictable. And on the other hand, and for reasons that I'll come to shortly, and a phrase I'll keep coming back to, most people resist most change most of the time. All change, even on a good day, is highly risky, expensive, and disruptive. The problem is, the less adaptable you are, the less adaptable your people are, then the exponentially more risky, more expensive, and more disruptive change becomes. And here's how that might show up, is possibly showing up in your organization at the moment. See if you recognize any of these. So for example, one, your strategies look good on paper, but you struggle in execution because people are too slow to let go of the status quo, and they're too slow to embrace and adopt the brave new world of whatever change it is. Two, even worse than that, some good ideas never even see the light of day. They never make it to project standard because people resist a change when they think that accepting that change is tantamount to admitting that the way that we've been doing it for all these years, right up until this point, is wrong. You give and take all of the technical training that you need to continue to be a subject matter expert in your field. Somehow the competition seems to be more innovative, always one step ahead of you. They're always doing it somehow bigger, better, faster than you are, even though you're investing heavily in your people. And that's because even if you're an expert in your field, if you're not an expert at adaptability, then you're not going to be an expert in your field for very long, are you? Because the game is going to move on to the next field. And finally, whilst grabbing opportunities and managing threats in the marketplace as they arise should be something that brings your people together in the face of a common change challenge, it actually tears them apart. just at the moment that you need them to go up a gear. And teams that cannot rise to a challenge together are destined only to fall apart. There is no middle ground, of course. And if that is the case, then the chances are that your external environment is moving faster than your internal environment. And you don't need to think about that statement for too long to realize its consequence. There can be only one outcome from that situation, which is that you're going to start falling behind until at some point, sooner or later, you will fall over. I've been leading change in some of the world's most innovative companies for over 25 years, from high-tech startups to FTSE 100s. And my career has taken me from the shop floor of a factory making these guys on the left here, jelly teddy bears, in a factory in Nottingham, right through to one of my last corporate roles as sitting on the board of a listed company in New Zealand. And one of the things I've noticed and observed on my journey so far is that irrespective of what your level is in the organization, irrespective of whatever your background is and wherever you're from, most people seem to be united, unfortunately, by the fact that most people resist most change most of the time. And in fact, the scores that you've given absolutely underline that. When we as leaders try and get people to embrace change and they don't, we think that they're being just difficult, bloody-minded, getting in the way. But actually, when you start to understand that we come pre-programmed with a couple of bits of software that make us resistant to change, then you can start understanding people's points of view, and maybe you can start understanding maybe how you yourself think a little bit better. Our most primal reaction to change is to see it, perceive it as a threat to our security. And that triggers the fear response, the very well known fight or flight. And of course, when we go into fight or flight, then we go into let's shoot first, ask questions later mode. Fight or flight worked really well back in the day when we were roaming the same savannah as a saber-toothed tiger. But if you go and look in your HR manual, fight or flight are both disciplinary offences these days. So not being able to control your fear actually isn't all that helpful. And I'm going to give you an antidote at the end of this session that will help you control your fear. We also have another piece of software in there that psychologists call negativity bias. And that focuses us on what could possibly go wrong. And here's the real kicker, because we've got another absolutely fantastic, unique piece of software in our head, one that can create a future in our minds that doesn't yet exist, our imagination. Amongst the 9 million species that inhabit the same planet that we do, we're the only ones who have imagination, which is great. But imagine this, you hook up negativity bias, which is a very strong innate primal reaction, with a highly active imagination, then no wonder that all too often we can predict for ourselves a pretty bleak future. We take a negative potential future situation and then we multiply that by another potential negative situation. And then we multiply that by our phone number, and all of a sudden, our future starts to look like an exponential cliff that we are falling off. And that is what gives rise to anxiety. So if we are going to become more adaptable, then as a minimum, we need to be tackling our fear and anxiety, because those are the two most primal reactions that change generates within us. So the question you want to know, of course, is how do we do that? Well, let's look at how organizations typically go about trying to prepare their people for change. And they do that in a couple of ways, predominantly. If you say the word change to most leaders, then they immediately interpret that as projects, Projects are the sole vehicle for most companies when they are thinking about preparing their people and their organizations for change. But here's what might be a bit of breaking news for you. Even successful projects don't tend to make people more adaptable. Now, that's a bit risky to say, because what you might be thinking is, well, if we're good at projects, then that means we're good at delivering change. And if we're good at delivering change, well, doesn't that mean that we are, by definition, adaptable? Well, no, it doesn't. And here's the logic that I just want to take you through. Project managers and the change managers that support them have a really tough job to do. They're given a very limited budget, a very limited time scope, and a very tight scope of work and deliverables that have to be done within that box. So they have to get in, coax people over the line to get that change done, and then get out again. And if they do anything more than that, they're in trouble, because it's called scope creep. Projects are risky, expensive, and disruptive enough without trying to do more. And no project brief in history has ever said, oh, could you please implement that new IT system or that new product introduction or that org restructure, and by the way, completely change the culture of the company so that we're all more adaptable at the end of this to help projects that are well outside of the scope of this project. It just doesn't happen. But fundamentally and permanently changing how people think and feel about change is a project in its own right. When I go in and work with leadership teams, I could be working with them for, I might not be there so many days, but I can work with them over a year to make sure that they have actually gone through that journey. Fundamentally changing our innate resistance to change that is so strong that even most of you have said that you need to go further than you currently have, and something stopping you from doing that. That is no 5-minute job, and it's a task that no project can afford the time, money, effort, or scope to take on. The point I'm making is that you can get people to comply with a mandate to use a new IT system without ever shifting their attitude to change. Complying with change is a very different thing from really proactively wanting to embrace it and having the curiosity, having the courage, and having the speed, all of which you need to be adaptable to do those things. Complying doesn't necessarily mean adaptable. Okay, that's a key point. Now, the second way that organizations prepare their people for change is through training. Now, no leader will say anything other than people are the backbone of our organization, which is good to have some audience participation, which is good because it's true. But in that case, what organizations tend to focus is on building the strong vertebrae of the technical skills within their organization. Skills that are as visible and as tangible as the contours on our backs. It's very easy to see that if your lawyers need to learn this new legislation, or your science people need to read this paper, then that is something that's very visible. The benefits on it are very tangible and they're very sellable to your clients. But actually, it is the invisible soft discs of adaptability that allow you as individuals, and therefore your organization, to bend and flex and shock absorb. And that's what's needed in a world that is becoming increasingly unpredictable. Now, if you're anything like me, I don't look after my back particularly well. I think most people don't. We don't tend to think about them until they go wrong. Only when a slipped disc is pinching on a nerve does the resulting pain force us to confront our need to become more flexible. Now, in the workplace, that lack of flexibility and the pain that it causes is actually a sign that we are falling behind. Organizations that are in pain cannot possibly be high performing. And if you've got high performing competitors, then you're going to fall behind until the point at which you fall over. So the point I'm going to suggest to you is this: we're approaching change the wrong way. If we can learn to control our fear and reduce our anxiety, then by definition, we are learning to become more adaptable. And that's really the point I want to make here. We can acquire and apply skills in becoming more adaptable. And according to the Oxford English Dictionary, that therefore means that rather than approaching adaptability as a logical, linear business process that's part of project management, we should be approaching adaptability as a form of intelligence, because it can be learned and developed and mastered, just like maths or music or martial arts. Just think about how different your life could be, how different just your performance at work, at home, in all aspects of your life could be if you were more adaptable. If you could roll with the punches when bad change happens to you, if you could grab opportunities when the good change it comes your way, how much of a difference could that make to you? And if your whole organization could take that and for it to become an integral part of your company culture, what could you achieve? If we believe that adaptability is a form of intelligence that can be learned, then that changes everything, right? Most people think that their relationship with change is fixed in stone. And luckily, happily, nothing could be further from the truth. We developed a roadmap to help people on their journey towards mastering adaptability. People who embrace change are progressing, and people who resist change are regressing. See, I told you it was simple. And what we've done is we've defined across the spectrum of adaptability intelligence, we've identified 4 levels, just to keep it nice and simple. And the logic as to how those levels are linked goes something like this. If you can control your fear, then there's much less chance that you'll be anxious about whatever it is that you're worrying about that could be over the horizon or around the corner that you can't yet see, that you're worrying about could bite you in the bum and cause you to be afraid at some point in the future. Now, if you can manage these raw, negative, emotional, primal responses to change, then effectively what you're doing is getting yourself out of your own way. And once you can do that, all sorts of magic starts to happen. All of a sudden, you can start seeing change, not as a negative, but as an opportunity to make a difference. It gives you the opportunity to make a difference and to add value. And the more that you can add value, and the more you can demonstrate that to yourself and to others, the more that you will be given and will search for the freedom to explore the boundaries of what you are capable of achieving. So again, hopefully this explains in very easy baby steps that there is a massive difference in the effect on our ability to contribute and our life experience, nothing less. It's a big claim, I know. You move from I am threatened to I could be threatened, to I could make a difference, to I could make all the difference that I can make. Now, in the full high performance change program, we've identified 12 antidotes to combat the reasons that we resist change and stimulants to boost the reasons we love it. And I'll give you a couple of those after the discussion. But those antidotes and stimulants build to a series of superpowers that range from self-control through to self-actualization, popularized by Maslow, but actually just a psychologist's fancy way of saying realizing your potential. I believe that you can only realize your potential by being adaptable and by embracing change. You can't do that just by repeating the status quo every day. So it's a choice. All right, so what I've given you here is I've hopefully explained and convinced you that adaptability is something that can be learned. I've given you the vehicle that says this is how you can learn it. What I want to do now is give you the carrot and give you the reason, if I haven't given you enough of those already, why you would want to make this journey. And this is where we get into the research. They took 100 companies and they analyzed, MIT analyzed their financial performance over 15 years, from 2003 to 2018. And what they asked those companies was, what was their most important cultural value? That's what they call these 9 things. They analyzed them according to their revenue, the graph on the left, and return on investment on the right. There were only 2 that stood out. Now, I know we have a lot of innovation, and that's kind of how Cambridge defines itself these days, which is fantastic. So you'll be delighted to know that innovation was streets ahead of the peloton in terms of its revenue growth. But of course, there's no prizes for guessing, given the topic of this session, that adaptability managed to get even slightly ahead of those companies focusing on innovation. But the punchline is really that then just taking those 2 superstars and analyzing those against their return on investment, innovation actually pretty much flatlined in terms of its ROI. I don't know why that was. Maybe it just takes so much investment to innovate. But adaptability, again, was head and shoulders ahead of any of the others. The punchline here being that adaptability is by a country mile the most effective skill that you can develop in your organization. If you look after people's mental health, if you look after how they deal with fear and anxiety and make them more adaptable, it actually gives you better results. So mental health is proportional to financial health. And mental health, people think, you know, it's just a luxury we can't afford. Well, actually, what I'm saying is you can't afford not to. That's what the data shows. But wait, there's more. If that wasn't enough for you, the researchers then asked the 100 companies to self-assess themselves against these 9 and how good they thought they were at innovation and putting the customer first and all of that good stuff. And guess where adaptability came in that part of the study? Well, it wasn't first and it wasn't second. And personally, I'm delighted to see collaboration and innovation right up there. But it wasn't even 8th. Adaptability came last. By their own assessment, you've said, most of you, that your organizations need to be more adaptable. Well, that was overwhelmingly the conclusion from the leaders who were completing this research. So the real punchline is this: the one skill that organizations need the most is the one that they possess the least. If you think about how much more adaptability could get you in terms of your revenue, your return on investment, the engagement of your people, then here's the evidence to back it up that says adaptability is the biggest bang for your buck, basically. A strategic imperative, surely, for any organization has to be the development of its most valuable assets, that's you, in mastering the skills that will most contribute towards its survival and growth. Oh, and by the way, it's revenue and ROI. In other words, it's adaptability. Technical experts who nonetheless cannot adapt will, when faced with change, tend to roll up like a hedgehog, denying the organization access to all those key skills and experience just at the very moment that they are needed most. Having all the technical skills in the world counts for nothing if you cannot deploy them in stormy waters. In other words, we all have to be experts in adaptability these days, as well as whatever it was that we were hired to be experts in. At any level of the organization, whether you're a forklift truck driver or a CEO, you have to learn, you have to be able to adapt to a world that is increasingly unpredictable. Fear is your response to a clear and present danger. It is something that is actually happening to you right now. Anxiety, on the other hand, is a response to your perceived negative future state. It's about what might happen in the future. Neuroscientist Joseph Ledoux said that anxiety is the price we pay for having a highly active imagination. The problem with fear is that the way it works is that we actually shut our own brains down from thinking. You think about the world's most amazing supercomputer. What does the off switch look like for that? So here's the antidote to fear, which is entirely counterintuitive, really not hard to understand, but really difficult to do, especially under such trying circumstances. And it's called discovery, which is don't run away from the source of your fear, run towards it. Find out everything that you can about that source of fear so that you are better informed. Knowledge is power, and that whole keep your friends close and your enemies closer type scenario. So when you are in a state of fear, what you do next, of course, is much, much more important than what you do in steady state running. Now, look, I think I'm pretty good at adaptability, of course, and I never thought that when I devised all of this model that I would need to apply those antidotes to myself. But about 18 months ago, actually in the last 18 months, I've had to twice apply the antidotes that I'm going to share with you to myself, because it's bad enough when change threatens to disrupt your life. But for me, I've had a couple of times recently where it threatened to end my life. So 10 days before lockdown, I had my tonsils out and I was called into the consultant's office. And obviously I was a little bit disappointed that nobody had given me ice cream. I seemed to be about 40 years too late to the party for that one. All I was given instead was the news that I had cancer. And now that came as a bit of a shock. I had not thought of that as a possibility at all. And my adrenaline, of course, went into overdrive. Now, luckily, I practiced what I preach because I did purposefully and consciously go into discovery mode. And it was good that I did because for the rest of the day after that news, I was wheeled around most of the departments in Addenbrooke's, being bombarded with a whole load of information. Key amongst them was a nugget that said, actually, Rich, there's an 80% 5-year survival rate for this type of cancer. All of a sudden, I was told that I was at the very lucky end of the unlucky spectrum. It turns out that tonsil cancer, I mean, who even knew that was a thing, right? Is the most junior off-peak part-time temporary member of the Big C club. And that changed everything. Now, if I had just been running on instinct, you know, I'd have shot the messenger or been running halfway down Hills Road before I stopped running. So discovery really helped me understand, and it certainly allayed my fears, because all of a sudden I went to thinking, oh, well, actually, this won't be so difficult after all. And that's exactly the way it proved to be. So it's completely counterintuitive. So the trick is not to fight the cause of the fear, but to fight your fear itself. And those are two completely different things. And the second one is about anxiety. Now, anxiety, remember, is our reaction to a perceived negative future state. So to continue my own story. So in about a year ago, September last year, I was given the all clear from cancer, and I had about 6 weeks of thinking everything was all right. When we went into second lockdown, I couldn't play hockey anymore, so I started running. And at some point, I felt a heavy feeling in my chest. And I had that uh-oh moment. Now, from that point until I was sat in front of Cardio Man at Papworth while he was busy pointing to a video of my heart and saying this constriction and this one and this one, and in fact, any one of these 8 constrictions that you have around your heart is possibly going to kill you sooner rather than later, but will definitely kill you. Between those 2 points, I didn't really know whether I had anything to worry about or not. So, of course, being a good human being, I defaulted to worrying about it anyway. Now, before I devised this material and before I started training this stuff, I think I'd have been quite a, sorry to be a bit sexist, but a stereotypical bloke about the whole thing. And I would have kept all of this to myself, but I didn't. And the antidote that I used on myself was the most basic of what psychologists call talking therapy, which is just about being open. And it really worked for me. And here's why. What happens in a state of anxiety is that we spin the wheels inside our head and we go nowhere fast. In fact, if we do go anywhere, it's only to dig ourselves a hole. Remember, I said we take a negative, multiply it by another negative, and we keep going. And that creates a vicious circle for ourselves. And it's exhausting being in a state of anxiety, isn't it? And we use all of our energy up digging that hole for ourselves to the point where we don't have any energy left to pull ourselves back out. And that's where we need to rely on the kindness and help of others. And as soon as you do reach out, what is it that anybody who cares for you wants to do? They just want to do anything they can to help you. And because they're not in the mess that you're in, they've got more energy than you, and you can tap into their energy. So we all know that openness is good, but we also know that there's an awful lot of people out there like me who used to think that a problem shared is a weakness exposed. When of course it isn't at all. And I really saw and felt for myself the power that a problem shared is a problem halved, because I was able to tap into all of that care around me that helped me get back up out of my hole and see that even if the worst did come to the worst, which it did, then there were people around me who I could share that with, and they could help me banish some of my irrational thinking and all of that good stuff. Anxiety is such a problem in society and therefore at work, because we are all world class at being able to keep our anxieties hidden, aren't we? And because anxiety is a hurdle to adaptability, anxiety is actually the silent killer of our motivation to change. Everybody feels anxiety. Lots and lots of people are even being treated clinically for anxiety, whether we know it or not at work. But imagine what performance levels we could achieve if our anxiety was not completely eliminated, but even significantly reduced. What could we do then? How much more high performing would we be as individuals and as a team if we could deal with our anxiety? And one of the ways we deal with that most effectively is just by simply talking about it. So from a culture point of view, if we all accept that anxiety is a major hurdle to adaptability, and adaptability is a major contribution to our bottom line, what are we as leaders doing to make anxiety a thing that is much less than it is today? Good for the people, good for the bottom line. Okay, so in conclusion, raising your adaptability intelligence isn't just the most effective way to grow and survive. It is actually the most valuable mindset that we can have for a couple of compelling reasons. And the first is those organizations that prioritize adaptability far outperform those that don't. And that's because, number two, adaptability is the best way to engage your people. Change is the best opportunity any of us will ever have to find out who we are, who we could be, and what we're really capable of achieving. Adaptability isn't a business process. It's an attitude to life, nothing less. And that will help you win your future, whatever happens next on your journey in life. Thank you very much.